Most people who watched that night thought Trump had come to win. Nobody caught the moment, 17 minutes in, 4 words from Chappelle, that made winning permanently unavailable. Dave Chappelle walked onto the stage of the Beacon Theater, carrying the specific gravity of a man who has spent his career studying power. Not admiring it, not fearing it, but reading it the way a mechanic reads an engine, with the patient, practiced attention of someone who understands that every system eventually reveals the source of its noise. Donald Trump arrived carrying 43 years of a narrative he had never once been required, in any room, to defend against someone who did not need the room's approval to speak. The collision between those two facts occupied 41 minutes of broadcast. By the end of the 17th minute, Trump had answered the question Chappelle asked with a silence that lasted long enough to become its own form of answer. By the end of the 41st minute, the story had left the building, spread across 11 platforms in 14 independent segments, and had begun the process of becoming the kind of cultural moment that people reference not by its content, but by its shape. The shape of a man who arrived to own a room and left having been read by it. 9:48 p.m. The Beacon Theater, Upper West Side. The technical crew that runs the venue has configured the stage for broadcast formats before. The desk setup, the asymmetrical lighting, the positioning that gives the cameras clean angles on both chairs, while creating, for the audience, the sensation of being inside the conversation rather than watching it. That night, the configuration had one addition that the lighting director noted in his post-show log. The key light on the guest chair had been pushed a half stop harder than the standard, not warmer, harder. The effect was subtle on camera and absolute in the room, a quality of exposure, of precise illumination that left nothing in the guest chair's space with anywhere comfortable to retreat. Chappelle was seated before the house opened. He had a glass of water, a notepad he did not open, and his hands resting on his knees with the loose, certain stillness of a man who has already made every decision there is to make and has arrived at the stage to execute them in sequence. Trump arrived 11 minutes later from the stage-left entrance, the approach that delivers a guest to the desk from the audience's right. The approach that gives the cameras the widest possible angle. The approach that men who understand cameras choose when they want to be seen arriving fully. His walk occupied its full share of the available floor, each step placed with the deliberate weight of someone for whom arrival has always been an event rather than a transition. At the chair, he stopped. His hands went to the jacket lapels, a brief, precise calibration before the commitment. He settled wide, claiming every available inch, his body filling the chair the way a flag fills a pole, completely, without apology, as an act of declaration. His eyes moved to Chappelle and held there, flat, measuring, the gaze of a man who has entered a room and is deciding whether it already knows it belongs to him. The first line came in the register of a man granting access. "Dave," he said. First name, immediate. The use of it, the first small act of the performance. "I always wondered when you'd finally get someone worth talking to on this stage." The audience gave a sound that had laughter threaded through its uncertainty. Backstage, at that same moment, the show's production coordinator had placed 4 items on the document table near the wings. She had arranged them in sequence. She had checked the sequence twice. Then she had stepped away and left them there, and she had not gone back, because the sequence did not need her anymore. Trump moved through his attack lines with the efficiency of someone delivering material he has delivered so many times it no longer requires preparation, only deployment. He told Chappelle that comedy, as a form, had become a delivery mechanism for a political position that its practitioners lacked the conviction to state directly, that the joke was the coward's version of the argument, and that Chappelle, for all his gifts, had been using the format as cover for a set of ideas he was not willing to defend in the open. He moved to the relevance attack next, positioning it as observation rather than criticism. A comedian, he said, whose most culturally significant work was now 2 decades behind him, who existed in the current moment primarily as a reference point for a generation that had grown up without having to choose between him and the alternatives. He arrived at the power claim with the unhurried certainty of long repetition. The ratings, the rooms, the 43 years of arriving in buildings and leaving them reorganized around his presence. He finished with the dismissal, delivered in the tone of a man being generous with his time. "You're sharp," he said. "You're one of the sharper people I've talked to, but you're still talking to me, and that tells you everything about who the room came for." A man in the third row looked at the stage without blinking. Chappelle had not moved. His hands had not moved from his knees. He had received every word with the stillness of a man who has spent decades on stages learning that the most powerful thing a performer can do with noise is refuse to compete with it, to sit inside it, to let it run until it exhausts its own supply, and then to speak into the silence that follows. 9:59 p.m. When Chappelle spoke, his voice arrived with no elevation, no preparation, no ceremony. It came in at the same level as conversation, unhurried, direct, with the specific gravity of language that has been held at the right temperature for exactly the right amount of time. "Everything you just said," he said, "was designed to fill the room with noise." He let that sit. But facts don't care about volume. One breath. So let's look at the facts. He reached for the first item the production coordinator had left on the table beside him. Earlier that afternoon, 3:17 p.m., 6 hours and 31 minutes before the taping, a production assistant had retrieved a sealed document package from a forensic authentication firm on West 57th Street. The chain of custody record had been signed by Chappelle's senior researcher at 4:44 p.m. The package had been placed on the document table at 8:52 p.m. It had not been opened before the taping began. The screen behind them changed. Video. Trump, 8 years prior, at a nationally broadcast town hall event, making 3 specific claims about his business record. One about the number of successful ventures he had launched. One about the aggregate revenue attributed to his personal brand over a specific decade. One about the survival rate of his major corporate initiatives. Each claim made with the specificity of a man presenting sourced material. Figures named, outcomes declared, the implicit argument that the record was available and consistent with the statement. Chappelle let the clip run without narration. When it ended, he placed a printed document on the table. A business records compilation, sourced from federal filings, court records, and corporate registry databases. Each source cited on the footer. The 3 claims in a left column. The documented figures in a right column. The columns did not agree on any of the 3 entries. Trump's jaw shifted. His left hand came off the armrest. He said the records had been selectively compiled, that the methodology was designed to produce a specific result, that anyone with genuine access to the full business record would understand that the figures on the page represented a fraction of the available evidence. Chappelle looked at him. "The sources are federal filings and court records," he said, "all public, all certified." A woman in the 4th row stopped adjusting in her seat and did not adjust again. Then Chappelle reached under the table. A second document package. Heavier, tabbed. The color-coded markers visible to the front rows as organized rather than theatrical. He opened it to the first marked section. Inside, a cross-reference compiled by an independent research firm, mapping each of the 3 claims against a longitudinal business record that included not just the successful ventures cited in the original clip, but the full universe of initiatives launched during the same period. The ones that were not mentioned in the clip, the ones with different outcomes, the ones whose exclusion from the original statement was itself a statement. Chappelle did not read the full document. He read 3 entries. He chose them the way a man chooses the entries that require no interpretation, where the distance between column 1 and column 3 was not a matter of emphasis, but of arithmetic. Trump interrupted twice. Chappelle paused each time, waited for the interruption to finish, and continued from the exact word where he had stopped. The studio audience made a sound at the second pause. Not laughter, the specific audible acknowledgement of a pattern. Trump reached for the document. Chappelle's hand came down flat on the cover. 2 more entries, he said. The camera found the withdrawal of Trump's wrist. A man near the center of the theater pressed the flat of his hand against his own forehead and held it there. 10:09 p.m. The screen changed. A timeline. Visual record of Trump's public statements about his business record, plotted against the documented outcomes of the specific ventures referenced in those statements, displayed as a data table rather than a graphic. Each entry dated, each source cited. The pattern across the table was not ambiguous, not a matter of interpretation, not a dispute about methodology. It was the pattern formed by the repeated distance between what was said and what the record showed, consistent in direction, if not always in magnitude, across a period of more than 3 decades. The scaffolding of it, the structural system that had been built, iteration by iteration, to keep the narrative standing in the presence of a record that pointed elsewhere, was visible in the table in a way it had never been assembled in one place before. Trump talked over the timeline. His voice built volume in the way it is built, when it is being used as a physical barrier rather than an argument. Chappelle let the volume run until it finished. Then he said, quietly, looking at the table on the screen, "That's not a disputed record. That's scaffolding." He let it sit. Built to keep something standing that the documentation says should have come down a long time ago. Nobody spoke for a moment, the audio engineer later described as the longest clean silence he had ever recorded in a broadcast setting. 10:14 p.m., the audio file, captured in a private setting. Voice certification on the lower right of the monitor. Independent firm, 3 reference samples confirmed. Trump in a post-meeting conversation, unguarded, speaking in the register of a man who believes the room belongs to him entirely. 4 sentences. In the first, a direct reference to one of the 3 ventures from the original clip. In the second, an explicit acknowledgement of the outcome that differed from the public statement. In the third, the phrase, "that version travels better." In the fourth, nothing, a pause that the recording preserved with the same fidelity as the words around it. Chappelle let the recording play twice. Trump said it was fabricated, manufactured, a production of the same media infrastructure that had been targeting him for years with increasing desperation. Chappelle placed the certification report on the table. He did not read it aloud. He turned it face up toward the camera for 6 seconds. A woman near the back of the theater closed her eyes and did not open them for the remainder of the evidence. A door at the side of the stage opened. A man, former business development director for one of the corporate entities referenced in the cross-reference document. He had worked in the role for 7 years. His testimony was precise and brief. What the internal projections had shown, what the public statements had claimed, and what the instruction had been regarding the language used to describe the discrepancy when it became publicly observable. He spoke with the flat, unhurried accuracy of someone for whom accuracy has been a professional obligation for a long time and has become, in this moment, a moral one. He said he had decided to come here 3 months ago, and that the 3 months had not been easy, and that he had not told anyone except his wife, and that she had said what she said. And he had driven to the studio this morning at 6:47 and sat in the parking structure for 40 minutes, going over the names and dates one more time, not because he might forget them, but because he wanted to be sure that the version of himself who walked through that door was the version that had made the decision fully and not partially. Trump called him a mid-level functionary with a personal grievance calibrated to look like professional conscience. The man absorbed the description without changing his expression. "Silence doesn't protect anyone," he said. "It just makes the people who enforce it more comfortable." The second witness came through the same door 70 seconds later. A woman who had served as a financial compliance consultant to 2 of the corporate entities in the cross-reference document. She had worked directly with the materials. She had signed a non-disclosure agreement she described, without visible emotion, as 14 pages of organized pressure. Her voice held for one full moment before the first sentence, the throat working, the jaw settling, the hands in her lap gripping each other until the knuckles reached a color that the front rows could see. She named the entities. She named the compliance findings. She named the specific step in the internal review process at which findings that were inconsistent with the public narrative were reclassified, not deleted, reclassified, placed in a category that standard research queries would not surface, available in the archive in the way that something is technically available, when access to it has been systematically made impractical. When Trump rose and said, "You signed a legal agreement. You know exactly what this costs you," she looked at him without blinking. "I stayed quiet because I was afraid," she said, "but I was more afraid of what it meant if I never spoke." The audience did not erupt. One person, a woman in the left section, 3rd row, placed her hands together once. The sound was specific in the silence of the theater, the deliberate, non-performative sound of recognition rather than reaction. A second person joined from across the room, then a third, then the theater, in the slow, rising, convergent wave of an audience that has arrived independently at the understanding that stillness is no longer an adequate response to what it has witnessed. 10:27 p.m. Trump's breathing was audible before it was visible, an elevation in the chest's pace that his posture was managing, with diminishing success, to contain. His hands had moved from the armrests to the desk edge, where they gripped with a rigidity that left the skin at the knuckles pale. His posture had undergone the compression that posture undergoes when the structure beneath it has been asked to carry more than it was designed for. His eyes moved through the space of the theater without settling, to the documents, to the screen, to Chappelle, to the camera positions, to the dark behind them, and found nothing that offered what they needed. His voice worked through the sequence, fabricated, coordinated. His attorneys were engaged. The legal implications would be examined before morning. He had survived worse. He was still here. The real record existed and would be produced, and the room would understand what it had been made complicit in. A thin line of perspiration had appeared at the hairline. His jaw was set in the specific, effortful way of jaws that are being held in place because the alternatives are worse. The final document arrived on the table. A compiled forensic business record, the full universe of the ventures referenced across all public statements, not the selected ones, all of them, documented outcomes included, survival rates calculated, aggregate figures drawn from the same federal filing sources as the original compilation. Chappelle placed it on the table beside the others. He looked at it, then at Trump. "The documents are on the table," he said, his voice at its quietest. "The timeline is on the screen. The witnesses spoke." He let the silence gather until it had weight. "Your move." Trump's mouth opened. The theater held the silence with an absolute collective stillness. The sound system's ambient hiss became audible, a thin, steady presence in the absence of everything else. A camera operator in position 3 held her lens on Trump's face without adjusting for 22 seconds. A floor director near the back of the stage stood with his headset half off, the motion of replacing it abandoned somewhere in the last 15 minutes, holding it at his side as if the action of completing it had become irrelevant to everything that was currently happening. Trump turned toward the stage left corridor without looking back, without looking at the witnesses, without looking at the documents, without looking at Chappelle, moving with the trajectory of a man whose direction has been decided not by intention but by the progressive elimination of every other available option. 10:41 p.m. First clip live. 10:54 p.m. 14 independent segments, 6 platforms. Velocities the monitoring systems classified as category level. The 4 documents reproduced side by side on 3 network broadcasts before midnight. No commentary, the record its own sufficient argument. The word scaffolding appeared as a segment title on 2 platforms and as a standalone caption beneath the frozen image of Chappelle's hand flat on the cross-reference document. Trump's counterstatements arrived in sequence, measured, then longer, then louder, then full capitals, each promising counter-documentation that did not appear before the next statement was posted. Each was screenshot and placed beside the specific clip it denied. Chappelle, still, hands on knees, reading. Trump, escalating, fragmenting. The comparison required no framing. Forums cross-referenced the corporate registry dates, the compliance consultant's NDA registration, the forensic audio certification chain. The promised legal action was not filed. The counter-documentation did not arrive. Months later, people were still watching the clip of the camera operator in position 3, counting the 22 seconds, asking what she had seen in his face in that silence that she could not bring herself to stop recording. After everything you just saw, ask yourself one thing. What else has been hiding behind the noise? Subscribe and turn on notifications, because this story isn't over. It's just getting started.